candidate today is a senior product manager at a fitness tech company who is seeking to just get a new role within the tech space, specifically also a senior product manager role. And the leadership principle that we are targeting with our question is deliver results. The question being, tell me about a time where you were working for a long period of time towards a goal or objective, and just walk me through it. I'll now give you the TLDR version of the interview where I'm going to read to you the feedback I would have read into the room had I been on the interview loop for this candidate. What I wrote was, throughout the interview, the candidate presents as more than competent and level appropriate in the core product management skill set. Their ability to deliver results shined throughout the totality of the interview. In this specific answer block for this candidate, they did suffer a bit from not quite outlining what the deliverables were and thus establishing the stakes. Delivering a new app, which I do have in quotes, is far less compelling than sought to transition user base to mobile application to dramatically improve user experience and cut down on fault errors. So this is a case where a few extra words can make a profound difference in the perception of the candidate. Overall, the candidate presents as being able to deliver results against deadlines and deliver meaty projects. The missing content from this answer would have bolstered the sense of ability of the candidate to operate at scale. I do want to jump in here real quick and just kind of add a little bit of context. One of your jobs as a candidate is to help me, the interviewer, picture you, not just in the role, but also being successful long-term at the company. And so what that means is, specifically if you're giving an older answer, like an answer from like further back in your resume, even if it was a few weeks old, your answer, right? You want to demonstrate that not only are you doing the job well, but that you're kind of thinking beyond, hindsight being 2020, that you can look back on it and present and here's the why of it, and here's what we would have done differently, and here's how this pertains to this other thing. Like, give me the bigger box, not just the little box in which you are operating. Because if you can't help me picture you in a more senior role at the company we're at, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to take the candidate who can do that. And so when I'm looking at you versus someone else, if I look at them and say, well, I could see them growing in role here, but this other one, man, that was a really good answer, but I don't really feel like they're going to grow much in role, or they're kind of capped out as far as where they're going to go. It makes it really hard to advocate for you as the candidate, right? You want candidates who are going to come in and grow and blossom within the context of this company versus where you're coming from. So do a better job. That's kind of the main takeaway for you, is just kind of do a better job of extrapolating more and explaining more to help me see the bigger picture within the context of what you were doing.
Shift gears and try a different question. And in this case, I want to talk about a time where you were working on a project, feature, whatever, or goal specifically though, that took a long time to achieve, or perhaps that you're still working towards. What is it? Or was it, I guess?
Yeah. It's a good question. Let me write a couple things down while I think about it.
Sure.
So I have kind of two main ones that come to mind. The first one is kind of an ongoing project that is critical to the company's well-being and future features and everything. And the other one was one that was backburnered for months and months and months and months and months. And then we finally knocked it out right. It was one of my final projects. And so both take a long time. Which one do you think works better for this question?
Well, so normally I would be like, well, you tell me, because I want to see where you go. I'd say, look, the question is, that you're working on, meaning you decided to work on it, not it was unimportant and we kept backburnering it.
Okay.
Right. So eventually we got to it. It's
sense.
Not the same as we were working on it for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. All right. So I would say the project that took the longest and was critically important to the company was our mobile redesign and rebuild from scratch. So technically, our mobile applications were in Xamarin, and so that worked out pretty well for a while. But we had kind of a couple different facets of our mobile application, with being kind of the planning and training sections, which are a little more straightforward, and then the workout player, which is pretty complicated. And so what we really wanted to do is we had just rebuilt the desktop apps in Electron and React. And so we wanted to not reuse, but share some code and see kind of if there's some small efficiencies we could glean out of the previous rebuild we had just done, which was honestly pretty fast. It took like 9 months to open beta, which was actually ahead of schedule. And it was a dozen engineers and a couple designers. And so we kind of pared down and knew what we were up against. But mobile is a lot more complicated, and there's just so many more intricacies to what is happening at that level. And so what we ended up doing is building it in React and React Native and Native. And we needed a lot more kind of clever solutions based on what we were getting ourselves into. Kind of the last part of this situation is that we had a moving finish line because we were constantly updating and building features, and we needed to roll those features in because we couldn't release mobile being behind the curve of anything else that existed. Up to a certain point, there was a couple pieces of the roadmap that we decided not to implement on mobile, and usually that meant we weren't kind of maintaining or launching any more of those anyways. So what ended up happening is the reason that this project took so long is because we had a tighter knit but more I guess higher strength engineering core to this. And then the design, we also had to kind of future-proof the app with some internationalization and a lot more kind of strings, some accessibility strings, things like that. And so we took that point of stop, and we had to future-proof ourselves for 5 years or something, 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever we could get out of this app. And so anything we missed at this critical moment was going to be very apparent within a year or two, and then we would kind of be in the same boat that we were just in.
Sure.
So what that meant is the product itself was still relatively straightforward, and there were some technical challenges to building out like an infinite scroll calendar, and honestly, the workout player we rewrote it in native, or we wrote in React, and then we had some battery problem issues where battery was being consumed at 50 or 60 or 70% faster than our old application, and that's important. So we ended up rewriting the whole workout player in native, which is something that probably we could have done a spike on both of those and seen, but battery life was just something that didn't enter that first kind of discussion, and everything worked as intended and was super crisp, and all our features were working, but the battery life thing definitely caught us off guard. So we ended up having to rebuild some of the charting systems in native. And what that ended up doing is we had to kind of port over our device layer so we connect to all the AMP Plus and Bluetooth devices in C#, and that's a huge project, and it's one of our kind of our moats that we have at Trainer Road is our device connectivity is better than anybody's, and that's because we put a lot of time and effort into connecting all the popular devices, fixing bugs from the popular devices, and actually making sure every device works exactly as intended. And so that was something that I was in charge of. And so making sure that stayed as a moat in the mobile application was one of the number one things. And so getting that whole system running in React and React Native was more challenging because there was hundreds and hundreds of different devices and different pieces that either didn't play as nicely in a WebSocket system or did play, and so we ended up having to rewrite part of our device layer also because we were trying to cram so many things into the same new ecosystem. But again, we kind of knew that was part of the problem with this push. It was going to be super difficult, and we're going to kind of uncover all the problems here and now, and then do the best we can, or get it to a state where it's releasable, and then that was going to buy us a lot of time and freedom in the future. And so that ended up taking, I think it took 14 months all said and done from the first day to the open beta. The good news is that the critical exceptions were actually better than our old application. The rate of engineering speed was like 300 or 400% faster, so we could knock out, the scope looked like we could buy back our time within 8 or 9 months. We would actually get back to the same place from spending the 14 months. And we kind of completely eliminated many of the little exceptions that were plaguing us that we had kind of set on the back burner that some of our customers had been seeing for a year. We did a full clean slate of, we've probably fixed 100 bugs that either we couldn't fix in the old thing or we could fix in the new, or that were part of the rebuild. So it worked out in the sense that it took forever, but we changed our daily active users from we actually swung some from mobile or desktop to mobile with the new update, which was super important because our mobile experience was better. Critical exceptions, which is kind of a main driver of churn for Trainer Road, was reduced by 66%. And then that engineering speed was kind of priceless. And I would say the fact that we fixed many things and stayed ahead of schedule and released everything, it took, I mean, as a company, that's a huge amount of time on something that's effectively the same thing we just had. But the engineering speed is definitely going to be the biggest.
You said 17 months or 7 months?
14 months from day one to,
okay.
I think it took 7 months to get to a closed beta, but once the devices started entering the equation, that's when we started seeing a lot of the problems. And so it probably took, I would say maybe it was 14 months till full release, but sure. 7 months to close beta, and then we hung on to closed beta for like 4 or 5 months before open beta.
There's a lot to like and a lot to critique in this answer. The reason being the candidate is clearly talented, and their speaking cadence and their just kind of personality is a little bit more laid back, so not the kind of more type A that you'd expect to see in most product manager roles, and that's changed a bit over time. But this is definitely a more thoughtful, kind of calm presence, which is actually a good thing. But the information delivered and the totality of the information leaves a lot of questions. And specifically for me as the interviewer, it all comes back to the word why. Why did you do this? Why was it important? Right? Why? The candidate presents the long-term project as being, well, we had to transition the mobile platform from, I think it was Xamarin to React Native. Okay, why? Why was that important? Later on in this answer block, the candidate talks about transitioning from desktop to mobile because the user experience was better. Well, why? How was it better? Why was that important? The candidate talks about a reduction in the end user faults that they were seeing. Why? What changed? How did this transition from one mobile platform to another for development? How did that assist in that? How did that make that a reality? Why was that the case? So this is a case where the candidate, it just takes a long time to get through his answer. So that's kind of a check minus, and didn't have good structure to help me understand the bigger pictures to what was going on, check minus, but then provides some, really thoughtful analysis as to kind of what was going on, kind of breezes past the point about connectivity being a moat for the company, breezes past the bit about, well, we had 12, I think it's a dozen engineers and a couple designers and presumably only one product manager, maybe more, but that's a lot of resources and it took 14 months of time. So there's a little bit lacking in terms of reflection on wow, this was a massive investment by the company. So how were you going to know you were being successful, which is what I get to in the next follow-up question. But the candidate just didn't paint that picture of competency beyond their box. And one of the things, this is how I thought about it when I was running teams, is when I think about product manager leveling, there's the kind of more junior people who you tell what to do and how to do it. Kind of the next step up from that is I tell them what to do and they'll figure out how to do it. The next step up from that is they're telling me what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And this is where this specific candidate is kind of stuck in between those two levels, because it's not clear to me because of what he's communicated, not because I think he's untalented or because I think he's incapable. That's not at all the case. It's what he's chosen to communicate. It's not clear to me that he understands the why of the decisioning to port. He didn't communicate that. And in that context, it makes it hard for me to think that he's doing anything other than operating within the box of, hey, you product manager, go manage this project for the next 14 months for transitioning from this one mobile platform to another one. And that's where it really struggled within this answer. But there's still a lot of great content here. And so this just really gets back to structure and thoughtfulness in what you're presenting, and not, in no way is this candidate giving incompetence vibes. Not at all. It's more, what has he chosen to highlight and communicate? And quite frankly, it started at the outset when he was like, well, I don't know which of these two to focus on. And I kind of made a little joke like, well, I'm asking you to focus on a big goal that you're working towards. And one of them is like, we backburnered it forever and we were eventually going to get to it. How important was that? So a little bit of decision making there that kind of not the best. But again, throughout the totality of the interview, presents is great. But in this specific question, which was pretty early in the interview, it made it harder to root for and advocate for this candidate.
And so, how did you, like, let's say you're halfway there. How would you have known you were being successful?
I'm just jumping in because I asked my follow-up question, which is, when you were far enough along, how are you going to know you're being successful? And before he gives his answer, I want to talk just a little bit about the why of that question, right? It appears unknown to the candidate that the point of the question is to understand their process. Like, I want to understand how they construct the deliverables and their process for going about that. And that includes frameworks like goal setting, milestones, etc. And so this was not clearly shared within the context of the answer that they just gave. But they did talk about it was a 14-month timeline, and it was 12 engineers, a few designers, and presumably one product manager. So let's call it 15 people for 14 months. Let's do the quick math. What is that? It's 210 man months committed to this. But that is a massive amount of resources for any company, especially when you think about dozen engineers and how expensive they are. Does the candidate really understand the process required to do that? Or were they just kind of operating and they were kind of being told what to do from above, and that didn't come out in the answer? So that's the point of this question. I'm gently giving the candidate the opportunity to demonstrate that they have frameworks, they can lead big, meaty projects with a lot of ambiguity from start to finish because they understand how to set the timelines. They understand how to set the goals, objectives, the milestones, etc. I want that to come out within the context of this answer.
I didn't. We were writing it internally, and we were getting lots of good feedback. We were pushing for a lot of the biggest unknowns. We were trying to get those knocked out as soon as possible, including the devices. Part of the problem was rewriting the QA spec from the old app to the new app, and so rewriting the QA spec on the fly while doing this because we hadn't encountered a lot of these problems and testing scenarios. So as I was able to write the QA specs and work with our test team to get that rolling quicker, we started iterating faster. But the initial learnings that happened once we had a writable or had a testable scenario after the first handful of months, it kind of took us to peel everything back and then start building the QA portions out from there. And then we were able to iterate faster, and then we were able to get more people writing. And so that spun up pretty quickly. But I guess for a handful of months, you didn't know whether you were successful or not, which was worrisome.
Do we think that the candidate landed what I was asking for? I would say probably not in the context of this answer. It's a good thing that the interviews, when you have with an interview, can be multiple questions and you multiple people that you're interviewing with. So the totality of the surface area that you have with your interview cadre is going to be hopefully sufficient that it will survive a not great answer. This wasn't a bad answer. It was just not a great answer. There were opportunities for this candidate to maybe mine for a little bit more content. Specifically, just totally glossed over this notion of device connectivity being a moat. Well, what does that really mean? And how many devices are we talking about? And why is it a moat? Is it hard? Is it not? How many developers do you have associated with that? It's a completely different team. Lots of stuff that could have been brought into. It was just kind of set context. Two, there seemed to be a little bit of discussion of, well, they're the mobile team and they're kind of building a better experience on mobile, but the desktop app team is going to continue developing, which presumably is going to cause API drift and a bunch of other things on the back end. So kind of managing through that complexity is actually quite hard. And the more senior you are as a product manager, the more likely it is you're going to be operating within your box with your direct and somewhat indirect resources, but definitely you're going to be operating against indirect resources, delivering against their goals that you now have to manage and communicate with to get alignment on what's actually getting done so there's not too much drift and everybody kind of gets to the finish line at the same time. That's really hard to do and something more senior folks have to do. And it didn't really come through in this answer, so it makes it hard for me to imagine this candidate as anything other than a senior product manager, which is, it's not a knock. Right? You can be a very, very, very competent senior product manager, but part of the interview goal for you as a candidate is to convince me that not only can you do this job, but you will likely excel and exceed expectations here at this new company, and that I, as the interviewer, can look at you and go, yeah, I could see them growing and role. So it's kind of a missed opportunity. And then finally, again, I talked about it earlier, but the why of the work, right? It's missing in this. I don't understand the why they transitioned from Xamarin to React Native. I could make my own conjecture points being a tech person myself, but I want to hear it from you, the candidate. Don't leave to chance what you could otherwise clearly lay out using your words to demonstrate your competency and how you worked within your organization to get things done. Don't assume that I, as the interviewer, kind of know everything. I mean, it's okay to over-explain, but you can also use kind of checkpoint kind of questions. Say, well, we were going to transition from Xamarin to React Native. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm happy to go into the details of that, or if you'd like me to just kind of gloss over and move on to the next thing. That's a way you can kind of create the back and forth with the interviewer that not only kind of builds that relationship that you kind of want to build, so that when I walk out of the room, I actually remember you, but also it's helping level set kind of how much detail to go into.